So you might want to speak to Special Advisors of the Treasury, the Exchequer, Secretary to Treasury, James Murray, I think. Then you look to speak to Johnny Reynolds in the Department of International Trade, Varun Chandra, number 10 at the Office for Investment, James Carroll, number 2 at the Office for Investment, those type of people, and Johnny Reynolds' Special Advisors.
You're listening to a phone call that was recorded by our investigations team when they went undercover.
This investigation has been going on for at least 6 months, and what that has involved is slowly building up trust with sources in Westminster who might have been able to help us. This is a world that can be quite secretive, the lobbying world in Westminster.
It's a world that can seem very opaque. So Paul Morgan-Bentley, head of investigations at the Times, was shocked when one of the people he approached was quite so forthcoming.
It was amazing that I'd contacted this guy, who appears to be very in there with the inner circle of Labour, out of the blue by email, and so quickly he was naming some of the most important people in government.
After several years of cash for access scandals involving the major political parties, the Labour Party is facing new questions over its links to lobbyists. From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. The story today, how the Times exposed Westminster's cash for access breakfasts. Paul, take us back to last summer. One evening in Westminster. Describe what's happening.
So there was an event. There are lots of events in Westminster that happen. There'll often be kind of awkward conversation over bottled beer and glasses of tepid white wine, mingling with people trying to impress each other after they've done their normal day's work. I obviously wasn't in that room. We've got to judge based on the information we have from people that were there and the pictures that we've seen from there. But what we do know is that speeches were given by Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Another speech was given by one of Keir Starmer's business advisors. And in the room, there were Labour MPs, there were figures from the business world, all kind of mingling in that way.
And Paul, as you say, there are so many of these events in Westminster. Who was organising this one?
So this one was the launch party for this new organisation, the Labour Infrastructure Forum, which
doesn't sound exciting.
It sounds fairly dry, doesn't it? It's all about that kind of big Labour promise of getting things building again. And seems like a great idea, getting business people together in a fair, open way with policymakers to talk about how we can, break down barriers and get the country building again.
Why were you interested?
Why I was interested is because when we started approaching sources and talking to them about lobbying, eventually one whose trust we gained sent us a prospectus that they had received. And it turned out that after this drinks reception over tepid wine and bottled beer, some businesses were sent this prospectus by the Labour Infrastructure Forum, and it raised very serious questions.
And tell me about the Labour Infrastructure Forum. I mean, is this a Labour Party organisation? Is it the government? Who's actually behind it?
Well, I know this won't be of much use for listeners, but I can show you if you go on its website.
What we're looking at is a picture of probably a while ago, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer staring at each other with St Paul's Cathedral in the background.
And they're wearing their hard hats and their high-vis tops, getting the country building.
Yeah, there's cranes. It looks like it's a hub of activity. It's also got sort of a big Labour logo on it. It looks like an official thing from the party.
It very much does.
It gets redder.
It gets redder. There's a big picture of Darren Jones MP, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, speaking at the Labour Infrastructure Forum's launch event. You keep going down, and at the bottom, there is this text that says, Secretariat, Research and Policy Work supported by Bradshaw Advisory. And that's a lobbying firm.
Right.
Now, Bradshaw Advisory...
Up until then, it looks like it's a Labour Party thing.
Absolutely. And actually, if you click through, it talks about how it has an advisory council and that has very senior Labour figures on it. There's Ruth Kelly, who's a former cabinet minister for Labour. There's Lord Ian McNichol, who's a Labour life peer and was actually General Secretary of the party between 2011 and 2018. There's 3 current Labour MPs. We've also found that there's a government whip in the House of Lords who's declared that she has been a member of the group, although we do understand that she's ended her involvement with the group several months ago. So in one sense, it is very entangled with the party, but actually there is a grey area here because on a day-to-day basis, the people running the group are lobbyists.
So, Paul, after that drinks do, this prospectus goes out to many of the people who were there. You get hold of a copy. Tell us, what was it about this prospectus that raised alarm bells?
So for the most part, the prospectus had all the boring bits about policy and infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. But then, if you scroll down, on page 6, there was a list of sponsorship packages. And here, written very clearly, were words and offers that you don't see usually made as clearly as this. Usually it's the kind of stuff everyone suspects, but here it was written in front of us.
They said the quiet bit out loud.
Exactly. We saw that and thought, wow, they're actually offering this to companies. One of the things that really stood out, there was a sponsorship deal for a private breakfast or dinner roundtable with an influential Labour figure, costing £7,850 plus VAT. The most expensive is the opportunity to pay for a Westminster drinks reception for up to £30,000 plus VAT. There's also a parliamentary panel event with key policymakers for £11,750 plus VAT. Again, key policymakers, that's exactly what lobbying companies want to see or want to hear quietly, that we're not just going to be there. Key people who can make decisions will be there. One of the things that kind of is always a big issue with governments is this idea of cash for access and allegations of cash for access. And lobbying, some people kind of see it as this bad word, but actually lobbying can be a great thing. It's really important in a democracy that you have a means of getting in touch with your MP, getting in touch with the minister potentially even, or the department to say, I've got some information you might want to know about. So lobbying in of itself is not a bad thing.
People do need access.
Where it becomes a problem is where, one, it's covert, so there's no transparency about it, secret meetings in kind of dark rooms that no one knows about, and also when money's involved. So when there's any suggestion that by paying a fee, those with the deepest pockets can get the best access. So it's not about what's the best thing for society necessarily, but which companies can afford to get in there with them. I should add that when I went to the Labour Infrastructure Forum and asked about these sponsorship payments, they said they were used to cover its costs.
What exactly are the official rules around lobbying? Because this is something that comes up, as you say, in Westminster scandals year after year.
Also, it's all about transparency. So when ministers or senior officials have meetings with external organisations, they are meant to disclose those. And then also there's the Electoral Commission, which oversees donations to parties. And again, if a political party receives donations, they are meant to disclose this so that we know who funds them.
So if people are paying to go to one of these breakfasts, surely that would have to be declared somewhere, wouldn't it?
So this went out a number of months ago. And we will see what eventually, if more details start to emerge about specific events. We have tried very hard. We haven't been able to find the details. One of the tricky things here is that even though the Labour Infrastructure Forum is run by lobbyists, because it's not itself a lobbying company, it doesn't have to disclose or, be registered with the UK's lobbying watchdog. And then even though there are senior Labour figures in it, it's not part of the Labour Party itself. So it doesn't have to abide by rules for political parties. So there's actually no obligation for it under the law to disclose things like the amounts of money it raises through these sponsored events. And then there's also the expectation from the public and things that damage people's trust in politics and in people doing the right thing for them. And this is exactly that kind of territory for me. It's the kind of thing, it doesn't pass the kind of you're around the dinner table with your family discussing whether things are good or bad.
Having established that, what do you do? How do you begin to investigate LIF, the Labour Infrastructure Forum?
So the first thing we got on this organisation was this prospectus. But we wanted to find out more. We wanted to find out what happens if a company approaches the LIF.
What do all of those options on the sponsorship list look like?
What do they look like? And we wanted to ask questions about that. And where does the money go? So we didn't know. So we had all these discussions internally about what we could do to try and find out. And we did a number of things. But then eventually we decided to go undercover.
Tell me about that.
It was a tricky one, if I'm honest, because usually when you're going undercover, and I've done a lot of undercover work, you're not approaching the most media-savvy people in the country.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
No, these are
know
people,
their way around the media.
These are people who part of their job is kind of trying to be media experts. So the type of people that would definitely read the Times. So it was kind of a bold thing to do to try and go undercover. But we thought there were grounds here and it was important that we tried. And we didn't know exactly how it would go.
So talk me through it. How did you go undercover?
What we eventually decided to do was we set up a fake company. And we set up a quite nice looking website, I thought, for this company, posing as advisors. We thought it wouldn't be believable if we were advisors of a new UK firm, because why would no one have heard of us in the industry? So we decided that it would be a company that was based in Ghana and that was looking to introduce business people, ambitious and successful business people from West Africa, and trying to link them to people in the UK because they want to invest in the UK. It was a slightly offbeat idea, but we thought, sometimes those kind of ideas work best. Why not kind of go for it? And I worked on it with David Wood, who's a colleague whose family is of Ghanaian descent. So he was able to really help out with making all that stuff believable and making sure that we had in conversations, if anything came up, cultural references in Ghana, things like that. He was totally on top of that. And we had aliases and we had fake business cards and we had phone answering and office service in Accra.
Oh, wow.
And we emailed the Labour Infrastructure Forum, and in particular a guy called Jerry McFall, who is the director of the Labour Infrastructure Forum and is very open about his very close ties to Labour and the Labour Party, but also is a director at Bradshaw Advisory.
Right.
He's a lobbyist.
And he's involved with the Labour Infrastructure Forum.
Yes. And we sent an email saying that we had a new client who was a business person from West Africa who was involved in the drinks industry and looking to massively expand, looking to do business in the UK.
And did they respond?
Well, it was interesting because I emailed this guy, Jerry McFall, who runs the Labour Infrastructure Forum, at his Labour Infrastructure Forum email address. Quite soon afterwards, the same day, I got a phone call on the kind of pay-as-you-go phone I had for this my undercover alias. And it was Jerry McFall.
And soon?
Yeah, and so soon, within a few hours. I actually initially missed the call and then he left a voicemail and I called him back.
Jerry speaking.
Hi, Jerry. One of the things that came up from it was that grey area between this organisation and lobbying, or the Labour Party at the moment and lobbying, because I'd got in touch at this Labour email address, the Labour Infrastructure Forum, and he called back and quite quickly was saying to me, oh, no, you don't want to do anything with the Labour Infrastructure Forum, but this might be something for my private lobbying company.
Well, let's have a conversation. It's not Labour Infrastructure Forum, it's a Bradshaw advisory piece. So you're looking for a policy and a lobbying effort on an issue.
He was saying that the Labour Infrastructure Forum was interested in working with well-known brands that had something established and serious to offer. So it wasn't something that was right for the company that I was approaching him on behalf of. It talks about how the Labour Infrastructure Forum proposed policy changes and things like that. So this wouldn't be appropriate for a smaller foreign company. But on the call, he also suggested that his firm, Bradshaw Advisory, might be able to help the West African businessman.
What was he able to promise he could provide?
Well, so I should say that he was absolutely clear that you can't just get in touch with ministers with a shoddy case. That would damage his reputation. It wouldn't do anyone any benefit. He advised us to be careful about anyone who promised us that they could get access. He talked about the fact that you really have to think about what you're wanting to do. If there's a policy area you're interested in finding out more about, having to have a really strong business case. And he described having a hook in order to try and get people's attention.
You need to have some kind of pull and you need to have a hook. So your hook's your sort of policy work.
And the different things that you can do as a company approaching people looking to invest in the UK. But he also very quickly was dropping names.
So you might want to speak to Special Advisors of the Treasury, the Exchequer, Secretary to Treasury, James Murray, I think. Then you look to speak to Johnny Reynolds in the Department of International Trade, Varun Chandra, number 10 at the office from...
He named James Murray, who's a very senior person, the Secretary to the Treasury, and mentioned that one of his colleagues at Bradshaw Advisory used to work for him. He even talked about Jonathan Reynolds, who's the business secretary, and Varun Chandra, who is one of Sir Keir Starmer's advisors. So he's talking about people right at the top.
That's interesting. So he's, on the one hand, he's saying he can't promise access. On the other hand, he's name-dropping all the key people that you, if you were a West African company, would really want to be able to speak to.
Well, you'd be thinking, wow, this guy's ambitious. We've approached out of nowhere. We're a company no one's ever heard of. And you're saying that potentially we could meet these people?
Yeah.
What was slightly frustrating about the call is that I wanted to find out more about the Labour Infrastructure Forum, and he really didn't want to go there. He was basically saying the Labour Infrastructure Forum is for really big name companies, British brands,
right,
who have a really compelling case to be put in front of these people. So he was saying it wasn't one for the Labour Infrastructure Forum, and was very much more keen on talking to me about the idea that we could work with Bradshaw Advisory. I asked him about costs. You probably have different packages, but what kind of amount are we talking about in terms of how much you charge for your services to help shape that whole thing? And he said the fee was about, I think he said something like 16 or 17.
Well, it depends. It depends on what the client is. You say our average monthly is about 16, 17.
And when you talk about, just to be clear, monthly 16, 17, do you mean 1,600?
No, 1,000.
16, 17,000. Wow, a month. Okay.
A month?
Yeah.
16 or 17,000 a month.
That's how much people are paying these companies because of the benefits that it can give them. And actually the most important thing to come from that call was that he mentioned previous work he'd done with a huge American energy company that's a big player in the nuclear world called Holtec. And he just mentioned that, Holtec, they've met all the key people in government, and they, at Labour Party conference last year, they had a meeting with Johnny Reynolds, who we know as Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, but he referred to him as Johnny Reynolds.
For example, Holtec, I've met all the key people in government, met Johnny Reynolds, conference last year to discuss inward investment, those opportunities. So
his client Holtec had met, he said, the business secretary at Labour Party conference last year. He was also keen to say that, they're a very serious company in a very serious industry, and they had a very compelling case. From his description, it wasn't just, hello, nice to meet you. He said it was to discuss inward investment, those opportunities. So this is about commercial opportunities.
Yeah.
After the call, when I then checked the ministerial records, the transparency data, ministers are supposed to disclose when they have meetings with external parties, and there's nothing there about a meeting between Jonathan Reynolds and Holtec at Labour Party conference last year.
No mention of it at all?
No.
Ah.
And this is somewhere where there's real questions over the rules about disclosure, because generally meetings during party conferences do not need to be disclosed to the public as they don't relate to government business. It might just be a politician meeting someone and talking about political things or their local party or something like that. However, the rules do state that if these meetings held in the margins of party conferences are in an official ministerial capacity, they should be recorded and published in the normal way. But this one hasn't. We went to the Labour Party about this, and a spokesman said, in quotes, "This was a meeting at party conference that was held in a political capacity. All meetings held in a ministerial capacity are declared in the proper way, in full accordance with the rules." And as for Holtec, when I approached them for comment, a spokeswoman said that in recent years the firm had met with political figures from a range of parties. She said that updating the government's transparency disclosures was a matter for government, and the firm said it competed in a fair and open process for government support and had not supported the Labour Party or the Labour Infrastructure Forum.
My colleague, Paul Morgan-Bentley, had gone undercover to contact a new group called the Labour Infrastructure Forum, which has been offering businesses expensive sponsorship deals involving private meetings with an influential Labour figure. Having chatted on the phone to its director, a lobbyist called Jerry McFall, Paul arranged to meet him in person.
Towards the end of that phone call, we arranged to meet in person. But then some interesting things started to happen, and I can't know for sure, but I think he got suspicious. Afterwards, you put down the phone and you think, God, that guy was asking a lot of questions. And it was interesting. I got an email from him quite soon after the call, again, not from his address at the Labour Infrastructure Forum, from Bradshaw Advisory, which was written in quite a formal way, which was quite interesting and made me think maybe he's on to us. He wrote, as discussed, what you're looking for is not appropriate for the Labour Infrastructure Forum as you require advocacy/lobbying. The forum does not do that. The forum seeks sponsors and is editorially independent from commercial interests. And he instead said, the work you're requiring is more suited to Bradshaw Advisory. But he did say, let's go ahead with the meeting. Another thing that happened is I talked about that prospectus that mentioned all those sponsorship deals to meet key policymakers and influential Labour figure. We'd also found that there was a version of that prospectus that had been published online. But the version that was publicly available did not include the page with the sponsorship deals.
Oh.
Which is interesting in of itself.
As we were saying earlier, this is the stuff that people don't normally put down in black and white.
Exactly. There was a week between the phone call and our in-person meeting, and in that time, that document that was online disappeared.
Ah.
So again, something had happened. But we decided to go ahead and go to the meeting and see what happened.
How did that play out?
We met in the lobby of a hotel in central London. It is my most unusual experience of an undercover meeting, and I've done a lot of these over the last 10 years, because it felt like one of these moments in a play where kind of everyone knows something, but no one is saying the thing. We were all kind of playing along. Now, I don't know. It might have been that he had no suspicions about this company and it's all a coincidence. But we felt it was pretty obvious he was acting very differently to how he was on the phone.
Right.
So, as an example, on the phone call, as we know, he was willing to discuss his firm's average fees. He was willing to discuss Holtec, this previous client of his, and this meeting that he said they had with the business secretary. Suddenly, at this in-person meeting, where he also brought a colleague along, he was saying that to discuss those same things would be inappropriate.
Even though he'd already discussed them?
Exactly.
How
Suddenly
bizarre.
he was saying, oh no, I've just met you, I couldn't possibly name a former client, and things like that. And he wouldn't give fees and all that kind of stuff. He gave one fee for a potential starter project, a very specific fee, but wouldn't talk about monthly fees and stuff like that. So it did feel very different. He also said at one point, talking about kind of specific government figures, we're not the kind of firm that talks about names and getting people, branding names about, because nobody can promise that someone's going to meet. Which I thought was really interesting, because on the phone he had named all these people, including Jonathan Reynolds. And then he and his colleague were very keen to stress, his colleague said, we're quite a transparent country. Ministers meet you on the strength of your case. Politicians in this country are very busy people, and they're looking for effective outcomes for their brief in a highly transparent manner. So, it was all a bit stilted, this conversation. And I tried to ask about the Labour Infrastructure Forum again, and he very much passed this off as something that was totally separate from Bradshaw Advisory. And he said, I'm just a member of the Labour Party. How many members the Labour Party have? I'm one of those people.
And is he right in saying that the Labour Infrastructure Forum is entirely separate to Bradshaw Advisory?
No, because when you look, a couple of months ago, actually, the Labour Infrastructure Forum was incorporated as a company, and it's owned by an offshoot company of Bradshaw Advisory.
Paul, when you went to Jerry McFall, to Bradshaw Advisory, with questions about this, as yourself, as a journalist, what did they say?
So we spoke to Bradshaw Advisory, and it said it complied with the law and disclosure rules at all times. The company also said that it registered all clients in the normal way, including Holtec, and it pointed out that under lobbying rules, individual meetings don't have to be registered. A spokesman said, in quotes, all matters of government competition and transparency disclosures are a matter for the government. I also got in touch with the Labour Infrastructure Forum, And they didn't share details about its sponsored events, we asked, but they said the group was committed to transparency and would have sponsorship details in its next annual report. The group described itself as a think tank. It said it was an independent legal entity to Bradshaw Advisory and that it sought sponsorship to cover its costs, like other think tanks, and that it doesn't do lobbying. The members of its advisory council, those Labour figures, they're not paid. The spokesman said journalists attended its launch and that the group was, in quotes, trying to boost UK growth and create well-paying jobs around the country. I asked the Labour Party and government also about details of any Labour figures who have attended private Labour Infrastructure Forum events, but they didn't provide these. According to the party, it has no connection to the Labour Infrastructure Forum and does not endorse its activities.
Paul, having looked into the Labour Infrastructure Forum, Bradshaw Advisory, they clearly think what they're doing is appropriate. For you, are there questions that all of this raises for the public? Are there things we should be concerned about?
100%. I think mostly that prospectus really gives us an indication of what kind of things are offered and the confidence you have to have as this new group that's actually backed by a lobbying firm to be able to say, sponsor this thing, and I can assure you an influential Labour figure will be there. No one should be able to say that. That really suggests a relationship that's inappropriate. And then also just the whole nature of it. If anyone Googles the Labour Infrastructure Forum, they can see for themselves, it looks like it's part of the Labour Party. There's a kind of blurring of lines between commercial interests there and the work of the party that's in power.
What else did you find that concerned you?
So as I said, we were meeting sources and gaining trust and things like that. And sometimes that takes a while. And one of the sources I'd been speaking to got in touch and they flagged something that some lobbying firms had been receiving. And this was just before Christmas. So at the end of last year, the Labour Party's events team, essentially, the officials, were looking to run events for Labour MPs, they said, from the front and back benches to celebrate the first 6 months in power. And they were looking for commercial partners for these parties. They were essentially Christmas parties. And the thing that really concerned the source was that this email in black and white stated that the deals would cost £15,000 plus VAT and would involve things like tickets for the lobbyists' staff and an opportunity to make a speech and things like that. But really crucially, there was a line in black and white in the email that said, in quotes, "This is a commercial transaction and not a gift to the party. It is not a recordable donation."
Hang on. How does that make sense?
Well, I kind of thought surely a rule will be broken here to be stating so confidently that we don't need to tell the public about this. What we have found is a little bit complicated after speaking to the Electoral Commission and the Labour Party, etc. So let me take you through it. Electoral Commission has rules that state pretty clearly that donations to central parties of more than £11,180, including sponsorship payments, have to be declared to the Commission and then they're published on its website. So everyone, you and me, we can see who is donating to political parties. However, in the email from the Labour Party to lobbyists, it didn't mention sponsorship. It classified these arrangements as commercial partnerships. So it wasn't sponsorship for anything specific, like, we're asking for sponsors of the bar or of the venue or anything like that. It said it was looking for commercial partnerships in relation to the events costing £15,000 plus VAT. And when we've looked into it and following the response from the Electoral Commission, etc., the law does appear to allow this, that when deals are for commercial partnerships, they aren't considered donations and don't have to be disclosed to the public. But again, it's this kind of taste test. It just doesn't seem right that the public don't have to be told about this. We asked the Labour Party about it, and a spokesman said, in quotes, "Commercial partnerships at events are a long-standing practice and have no bearing on party or government policy. The party fully complies with all rules relating to the reporting of donations."
Paul, with all the examples you've talked about, there is just this sense that with this Labour government, there is a closeness to some of these lobbying companies. Why is this something that should alarm us?
I think as members of the public, as members of the press, we want to think that there's fairness in how the government is overseeing the running of the country. And any suggestion that any commercial interests get a better chance than everyone else because they're paying or because they're using a specific firm would not be right. There are rules in place to govern lobbying, and they're meant to ensure transparency and that this stuff is fair. We shouldn't be seeing a prospectus that spells out that for this amount of money you can sponsor an event in private where you can meet an influential Labour figure. That is just not right. And there needs to be transparency. And so if there are meetings that haven't been disclosed, we need to know why. We need to know as the public when our ministers are meeting companies and talking about investment and commercial interests. We need to know that's happening.
And this was a government that came to power criticising the last for exactly this kind of behaviour. Does it undermine confidence in politics itself?
I think that's at the heart of this. And we can talk about the specifics and the wordings and the rules and whether there's a loophole or not. But it's about undermining trust in politics and undermining trust in the people who are supposed to be making decisions to benefit us. And that, that's the real shame, I think, for people here. Again, there's people who get a better chance than others because they're willing to pay, potentially. And that, for me, the undermining of trust in politics is the centre of this kind of story.
And Paul, as you say, lobbying does actually fulfil a really important function in a democracy when it works well. At the same time, it feels like it has been the source of so many political scandals now. If you go all the way back to 2010, I think it was David Cameron before he came to power who said lobbying would be the next big scandal waiting to happen. 15 years later, it still is. What's going wrong? Does it need better rules? Does it need better transparency? Why is it still the place where Westminster seems to unravel?
It definitely needs better rules. I think there are rules in place for the government and for political parties, but there aren't many rules in place for lobbyists themselves. And until that is strengthened, we're going to see these kinds of problems. Lobbyists themselves have to, in quite a vague way, report to a regulator a list of clients that they are actively lobbying for. If you're an internal lobbyist that works for a company and you're meeting government figures, you don't have to declare that. It's only lobbying companies. And I think it's really striking at the moment, if you go on a site like LinkedIn, there are often lobbyists themselves saying, we need stronger rules. And when industry itself is saying that because they're worried, I think that says a lot.
That was the head of investigations at The Times, Paul Morgan-Bentley. And you can read more about this lobbying story at thetimes.com with a subscription. The producer today was Edward Drummond. The executive producer was Dan Box. And sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. If you can, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.